right, welcome back to another episode of the Passion in Motion podcast. I am your host, Muta, and today I'm joined by Casey. Hi, Casey. How are you?
Hey, how are you doing?
Doing great, doing great. How about yourself?
Good.
Awesome. All right, so listeners, so today we have Casey here, and we know we're gonna talk about a good range of things, but mostly about her efforts, community efforts to helping, people out there in the DMV area with, different things and getting to meet up and, well, I'm sure you'll dive more into that, but I'm excited for that piece. But, as we get started here, the usual run of things is I'm gonna dive into you a little bit to understand more of who you are and, all that fun stuff. So, yeah, do you have like a brief 1 minute spiel about yourself?
I think so. A few things, just kind of professionally, I worked as a researcher for 30 years before this kind of present time kind of rolled around that unearthed and changed and shook everything. I live in the DC area. I've been here since 1999, I think,
Nice.
2000. So I've been
Okay.
here for a long time.
Okay, cool. What kind of a researcher were you? Like, what kind of research did you do?
I did all kinds of research. So I did survey research for a long time, usability research, a lot of like multilingual, multinational kind of research.
Mm.
I did, and then I worked in public health for a long time doing qualitative research, like HIV prevention and treatment, and evaluating communication materials for the government was
Mm.
kind of the main thing that I was working on up until April
Okay.
of this year. And then I also was able to get involved with some community-based participatory research projects, which was pretty cool, which involved some kind of community building and collaborative efforts and things like that. So it's
That
it's all like I loved it. Like every minute of it, I loved it, even though I'm in a very different direction now.
Did you always want to be a researcher? Like in general? Or like how did your career start?
Um, Actually, it's kind of interesting. So I read a book by Oliver Sacks called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat when I was in high school. And
Mm.
that had me just super interested in neuropsychology, which is kind of the study of like brain structure and function.
Mm.
And so that's what I studied in school, and I was working in in research at the time. Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting because at this time I'm kind of like at a totally different era of my life right now where
Yeah.
things are kind of like coming full circle in some kinds of ways. And it's interesting because last week I had kind of a main breakthrough in my effort and saw in Oliver Sacks' book, the same author, but a totally different kind of book on somebody's desk.
Mm. Well,
So
what was that book about actually? I don't think I've heard of that book before.
So the first one, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a
Yeah.
Hat, was about how when you have like a stroke or a certain kind of brain damage, it has very specific effects on the way that your brain works.
I
So basically, if you injure one part of your brain, the whatever function is housed in that part of the brain will be affected. I mean, it's interesting stuff. I can talk about it all day long, but
So with strokes, it's one of those things that honestly scare me a lot about life because I don't know how they happen or how they come about.
mm,
And I've just seen that they do, like as you said, whatever injury happens, it kind of like has these long lasting effects or changes in how your body functions. And I'm just always like, man, what, how, and it doesn't sound like, well, I guess the older you get, the more prevalent it can be, right? But it sounds like it can happen at any age as well,
yeah.
to an extent.
It can happen at
So,
any age and with any kind of health effect. I think the thing that drove me away from it was that it's a super interesting field, but also
mm,
there's not too much that you can do. There's a little bit of kind of training things and things like that that you can do with people, and there's something called neuroplasticity where people can grow back the functions that are impacted.
yeah.
But essentially, like studying that kind of thing had me, if somebody knew of somebody who had a stroke or something, really excited to find out what happened to them. And I realized that's just messed up. Like, I don't want to look at anybody that way ever again. And so that's kind of what drove me away from the field, I think, was that kind of, that what is it that they call like the car crash excitement, kind of a thing.
Mm.
Looking at something horrible that's happening to somebody with like some kind of curiosity and yeah.
I get that though, but I feel like sometimes those things are needed because, or people like when you think that way, because it's not as if like, oh, I'm happy this happened, but it's like at the same time, it's like I'm happy that you get to, because for me, I always wonder. what certain experiences feel like
Hmm.
or what happens, but obviously I wouldn't want to feel that myself or want anybody to feel that, but sometimes just the curiosity of it, like I wonder what happens when this particular thing happens. I wonder when, you know, so it just, but to do it yourself or to have someone experience that, that's not the goal, but just the curiosity of it though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I mean, like even growing up, is that something that you've always wanted to, like, did you think you want to be a doctor at any point?
So,
Or,
no, like I didn't even know that that existed, and I found out about it, and I was pretty excited about it. And then it's kind of funny because later in my career, I was doing a little bit of like multilingual, multinational research, and I found there was like a talk that was listed called the
mm,
Sociolinguistics of Survey Translation, and I was like, wow,
mm.
that's kind of where I am now, so I'm going to attend this talk. And I'd never heard of sociolinguistics before. And I was so enamored by the talk that I enrolled in a sociolinguistics program within that year. So I'm kind of that sort of person where I see something and I'm like, no, that's what I want to do, and then I kind of go for it. So that's what happened for both of my degrees.
Nice. Wait, what exactly is sociolinguistics? Like, what does that entail?
It's like all of the social baggage that comes along with language. It's one way of looking at it.
Interesting.
It's like looking at,
Okay.
the patterns and how we speak and what kinds of, what the meanings are behind that kind of thing.
I've been talking about this on previous episodes, how I really want to get someone who understands like linguistics a lot. So I'm happy that you have some experience with that because I've always been fascinated by language and like because I speak two languages fluently and another one I can understand it, but it's just about how like language, even in English, it can be so nuanced,
Hmm.
but just the interchangeability of like for example, like, when people say, do you dream in a certain language? Or, those kinds of things, or like which language do you express yourself
Hmm.
differently? Like, if you speak two languages or more, like how do you process your thoughts
Yeah.
in, let's say, English versus Spanish? You know, where's your most authentic self? Is
Oh.
sometimes you like, especially if you've grown up bilingual.
Yeah, so there's so much there. Like, in terms of what language you dream in, just kind of like a fun fact. My ex-husband was Ethiopian, Eritrean, and I found that when I was with family and they were speaking Tigrinya, that I would dream in Tigrinya even though I can't understand it. It's
Interesting.
funny what happens when different languages meet. But the last class that I took when I was studying for my master's was language contact, which is exactly like
Mm,
you lived it, I lived it. Like that's the story of our lives. Like what happens when we
yeah.
have multiple languages at play and that kind of thing. And there was a book that we read by Jan Blommaert. He's Dutch, like a Dutch sociolinguist that
Mm,
was amazing that said that the language you speak is a map of the life you lived. Which is to say that, like,
interesting.
if I've never been fishing before, I may not have the English vocabulary for fishing. You don't get these things as one block. So if you think about like cooking, who is it that you're normally cooking with? What language are you using in the kitchen? You have different languages that you use for different parts and things like that. So when you say what's your most authentic identity, it's almost like, if you kind of, lean in different ways with different languages based on the experiences you have, what are the experiences that you think of as being your most authentic self? There's some
Mm.
really interesting questions that kind of go along with that.
There are some very interesting questions that come along with it. That's so true because again, like it's I always come back to this episode in Modern Family, Gloria, I believe,
Mhm.
because usually what happens, especially in this climate, when someone has an accent, it's looked down upon, depending on which accent you have, because
Yeah.
a Spanish speaker's accent is viewed lower than you have a British accent or an Australian accent. There's that hierarchy of however you sound, right? Or I'm trying to think of a language because I guess English, they still speak English. I'm trying to think of a language where it's not English, but that accent is respected more than other accents. But anyway, you get the point. So
Mhm.
anyway, I was just so anyway in that episode, she was speaking about how like in English, people don't think she's as smart. Like when she speaks English, they don't think, oh, that's an intelligent person. But then she was really frustrated by a particular thing that was happening. And she said, you guys don't understand how intelligent I am in Spanish. Like you don't actually get it. Like,
Yeah.
so it is just that I've always thought about that because it's so true though, because the way you express and think
Mhm.
in one language is going to be different from something that you're not used to. So anyway, that's just always been something that I find really fascinating.
There was something that Trevor Noah said once that was kind of this like little bit that he did that was talking about how when he spoke Spanish, his pronunciation was so good that people just couldn't believe for the life of them that he didn't speak Spanish. And he was also talking about English. If he spoke with a British accent to people, people wouldn't believe that he didn't speak English and believed him to be, kind of more intelligent and all of
Mm.
those kinds of things. So
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
there's a lot. Okay, cool. So when you finished school and college, so when we're talking about the field of research, what kind of organizations are we talking like working? Like, do you go to work at a think tank? Do you go work at like, I don't know, a hospital? What like for you exactly, what was your path after finishing school and then in this field?
So there are a lot of different way like research just kind of it hits so many different like fields and places of work and things like that. I personally, so I started out working in hospitals and
Mm-hmm.
medical research centers, and then I was working in the nonprofit sector for a while. Then I was working for a membership organization studying people who studied physics, which was a cool kind of, context to be working in. Then I worked actually for Nielsen, like the TV ratings company, for a
Oh,
little while.
cool.
And then I worked for this teeny tiny multilingual company that did, for example, a lot of like the multilingual recruitment, like testing the language around multilingual recruitment for the census and testing like
Mm.
the online versions for the census and things like that. And doing primarily government contracting work. And then I worked for a larger research organization. So there's also, I mean, there's the market research side of things, which I know a little bit less, but those are the places that I've worked at. So everywhere from like a 7-person company to like a 30,000 person company.
Wow, that's yeah, that's actually fascinating. Like that's a really cool journey. So I'm the TV rating one at Nielsen. So what kind of like research were you doing like when it comes to like ratings?
So, well, there were two different things that I was doing, two
Mm-hmm.
kind of main efforts, and then a couple of kind of smaller efforts. One was we were developing a website for people who are participating in the panels. So it was like a
Okay.
usability research and adaptive design kind of environment where we're working with people from all different areas of the business to make sure that all the different areas of the business were represented as we did it, and then doing like iterative testing, including in-home testing. So we got to fly to different cities around the country and go to
Nice.
people's homes and have them test the website in front of us, which was pretty cool. And then,
Yeah.
I led like an overhaul of our recruitment materials. And I think it was 9 languages, but I'm not sure. So I had like a little
Mm.
language team in each language of, people who were doing the recruitment that I worked with to develop
Nice.
materials that they could use in the field.
That's cool.
So,
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
mm.
Very nice. So, okay, so when it just comes to all this, what's your, let's say your favorite, because I know you said you also did like surveys as well. Like, what's your favorite survey that you've conducted or
Well,
like
the
a
favorite,
particular
so when I
research?
was doing the
Yeah.
HIV prevention and treatment research,
Yeah.
that I think it was like that was amazing. So in that
Mm.
case, like there was one moment I would think, like there was one study that we worked at, and we were hoping to have all of the interviews lined up before we got there, but we didn't. So I
Mm.
flew to Columbia, South Carolina, which was a city I'd never been to before, didn't know too much about, to an organization that was like a CBO that was providing HIV, I think just prevention, but they might have had some treatment services as well, to interview people who were either disengaged from professional or from prevention and treatment services, or people who are from communities who were traditionally disengaged from those services, to have like
Mm.
in-depth interviews with them and with the people who are providing services to better understand why people were disconnected. So it was part of like an IDIQ or a set of studies to really look at those reluctant points where people weren't engaging with the profession and with the prevention and treatment services to better understand what kinds of things kept people from engaging in those services. So those were like, there were very powerful interviews with people.
Mm.
It was cool because it gave people a chance to talk about things that they didn't really have a chance to talk about. Like, I think it was just a cathartic experience for the people participating in it as well as me. But it also, I think, kind of coming out of it, that's where I discovered the community-based participatory research thing and the importance of it, because I went to a conference that was specifically about HIV, where you had the trans community who was saying nothing about us without us. Don't go
Mm,
researching our community if you're not involving our community members, which just put everything on its heel because it was like I'd already been working in research for, 20 years, and that had never occurred to me. But it's so
yeah.
true that it's a totally different product and process when you involve the people who are, being researched from the very beginning. So,
Yeah. That's how it should be though. Like I feel like whatever is being done, research, that was like it's one of my biggest criticisms when it used to also come to like development work outside of like, when people go, let's say to go to an African country or whatever, and then, don't involve the community that you're
yeah.
working with, or like, you're trying to do something, but you're not involving the people you're working with.
Yeah.
Like you use all these other experts, but you're not using the local experts. You're not using the people who actually know the people around. Why is this happening? And then usually those projects don't tend to do well
They don't tend to
because,
do well because they don't
yeah,
accurately represent the community. They don't even serve the community. They're not relevant. It's done by an outside group. And so often it's done by an outside group and received by an outside group and has very strong effects on the community. I mean, that was something that you had to consider all the way through. And it's one hand clapping when it's you who's not part of a community saying, how can I, present these findings in such a way that it's going to impact these people in a way that's actually going to be positive in their lives? But
exactly.
ideally you have that pipeline from the beginning. Even how do I answer or how do I ask this question in an authentic way that's going to resonate with people? If you
Hmm.
create, especially in surveys where you don't really have the chance to give and take, in interview, which mostly my stuff was like one-on-one in-depth interviews, where if the question didn't land, I could still work it out with the person in
Yeah.
conversation and still get to where I needed to go. But yeah,
Hmm.
so often you're asking the wrong question. You don't really end up getting like the really useful results. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And when you were saying that you did HIV research, you know, I actually, maybe this a misconception of mine as well. I don't even think that you're talking about in America itself because
Hmm.
at the end of the day, I feel like HIV is kind of like taboo in
It is
America.
very taboo, and that was so much of the research that we were doing was like diving into the stigma around it and going to places that were very high transmission, but also and you really like talk to people about the stigma. In some places, I mean, there were people. There was one study that we did with people where we're interviewing people who had been outside of care for some period of time,
Hmm.
which is that the point of care has gotten to the point where like the quality of care that you can take a medication daily and pretty much just have it under control. It's not always 100% effective, but in most cases you
Yeah.
can take it, have it under control. You can't transmit it to other people. You live a long and full life. The only difference is that you're taking this medication every day, but people don't know about
Mm.
that in some places because it's not very openly talked about. There was this stigma where people still felt like they had like a death sentence in front of them and had gone through these really like rocky periods of health and kind of dealing with their own self-worth and the stigma and being ostracized by their family and that kind of thing. Despite all those services existing, despite the medication existing, people weren't taking them. I mean, those were some of the most impactful interviews, talking to people. And really, when we talked about what brought people to care, it was an interesting situation because it was really that somebody had the audacity to really care about them. You talk about like the community health workers who are like the real heroes of our medical system, where they were really like they were going to appointments with people. They were just calling and checking in. They were available to help with whatever somebody needed help with in order to help to get them into care. And it wasn't like my job goes, these 3 inches in this direction, but not 4 inches in that direction, which is so often when you find help, it's just enough help to do this one thing. And then this is where my job ends. But people were really like going much further in order to
Mm.
support and care for people and get them into care. So
No, that's so lovely. So when did you do this research? Like what was the time period for that?
that would have been, I think, 2016 to 2018, maybe, or something like that. No,
That's fairly recent. So, since this is actually like pretty taboo, like so what's the prevalence or from the research you're doing, like how widespread is when we talk about HIV in the United States? How much how wide is it? How prevalent is it actually? If I don't know if you know the numbers specifically, but generally speaking though, from what you I guess found out through these surveys, like how much out there is it?
so like 2016 to 2020.
Okay.
Okay. Um, it was funny because, knowing the numbers and the prevalence and things like that, those were parts that other people within our like multidisciplinary team would write up when we
Yeah.
wrote up the findings. So it's not something that I know very well. So I kind of knew some of like the transmission hotspots and things like that. Like people say, "Hey, I'm going to Miami," and I'll be like, "Miami, that's one of our HIV, hotspots. I've been there. I spent a lot of time there."
Yeah. Was it more prevalent than you expected though?
Um, it's in pockets. It's really in pockets that it's more
Mm.
prevalent. And part of that makes me wonder about eh, so there's a lot, I think, when we come to how common it is or the prevalence of it. There is something to be said for who gets tested and who gets the resources. There was one
Mm.
study that we did about PrEP, looking at why African American women were like not taking PrEP on any kind of scale.
Huh.
It was because like it had never occurred to them that it was for them. They always thought it was for men who were um, sleeping with men and
Mm.
and not for them. Things are, men who have sex with men is like the highest area of prevalence for HIV. And so a lot of resources are kind of channeled in that direction. And I spent a lot of time just kind of testing it out for myself to see whether I could get STI tested as a married woman. So at the time I'd been married, 15, 20 years or something like that. And I would go in for my checkup and I'd ask for STI testing. They'd be like, "You're married. You don't need it." And I really wanted to
Mm.
seek, is it possible for me to get the testing? I would really, maybe even I think at some point I even made up stories just to like see if I could.
Wow.
And then when I went to that conference that I mentioned before, I heard people saying I had it, but nobody would have guessed that I had it. Nobody tested me for it or anything like that because I wasn't part of that target population. So you look at like who gets tested, who gets like where the services are directed and things like that. And then you also have the area of stigma, right? Because if you're
Mm.
looking at one population and saying that that's where the prevalence is the highest, people associate that population with HIV so strongly, even though if you look at the raw numbers of how many people there are with HIV, it's not like that's 80% of the people with HIV or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
yeah, people get kind of, and I think people don't always understand what the statistics actually mean, including even the people who are working very closely in these areas, because they get
Huh.
so caught up in prevalence and like targeting their efforts in ways without necessarily even looking at the consequences of targeting those efforts.
Hmm. It's yeah, it's fascinating because again, like, HIV is rampant in Africa, right? Like I think it's gotten much better now, but it's still pretty high in different countries. And, the stigmas that come with it, I mean, there are different stigmas that come with it, but it's not the same stigmas that are in America, for example.
Yeah.
And I always find that interesting, because again, I think in America, I think the first person that I know wide known was it Freddie Mercury, like where
Mm.
that was affecting him, right? Like HIV, but and like all that, and like just the stigma that came out with that as well, right? And many people didn't even know at the time that that's what was happening, but it was, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just yeah, I've always kind of find interesting as well, like how different groups of people are attached to a different, you know. Illness. And in Africa it's like, oh, HIV is just, it's like just whatever, right? It's
Hmm.
that's what it's out there, right? But then it's also like, no, I mean, it affects everybody.
Yeah.
It's just on one person or a group of people.
And the stigma part of it is such an important part of it because it affects, I mean, really people's quality of life. Sometimes it affects,
Yeah.
whether or not somebody lives. But it also, so it manifests in different kinds of ways. It can affect whether or not people are engaging in prevention or treatment services. It looks different in different kinds of ways. And how do you study that kind of thing? When it
Hmm.
has such a direct health effect, ultimately, it is important because it's such a big determinant of health and engagement with health services. I think a little bit about like back when I was doing the HIV prevention, that was on behalf of the CDC. So we
Mm.
went to the CDC at the time that they had this Ebola exhibit
Yeah.
in their main building, which was all about how when they first came out to treat Ebola, they would have, this is what we need to do, this and this and this. And it didn't work with the culture. So they had to dial back and say, what are the cultural things related to the practices that we need people to, the changes that we need people to make and that kind of thing. And how can we actually implement changes that are culturally appropriate that people will embrace and support within a community that we can actually fight Ebola. And stigma is a
Yeah.
lot of the same way, right? Where you have to like be able to actually understand what the shape of the stigma is, what it looks like in order to be able to fight it, in order to like increase engagement with health services and, help people to like do the preventative things that they need to be able to do and, take treatment. I mean, think about even just the stigma of people having the HIV medications. Like I said, you can take those medications every day. And for the most part, if you take them every day, you can live a long, full life. Well, what
Yeah.
if you're worried about having that medication on your shelf? What if you're worried about being judged for that? Even if you're non-transmissible, even if you're not going to transmit HIV, you know? That like there's this U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. If you're taking your medications and you're under control, you have a 0% chance of transmitting HIV. But if you're afraid to take those medications, what happens? Your health suffers, the people around you, like their health might suffer. So stigma is such a huge part of it. And how do you study the stigma? That's not something you can do with a survey or anything like that. So that's something where you actually have to like get to know the community. And that's definitely a place where you need community involvement.
100%. Even when it doesn't even have to be health, right? Even when it comes to things like birth control, like,
Yeah.
for some, there's the stigma like, oh, if you know a relatively young girl and you found with like birth control pills, instead of like, oh, at least you're trying to prevent it, people are like, oh, you're sexually active, and it's a whole thing. Or if like, if you go into a teenager's room and you just find like condoms, or whatever, or just things like that, where it's like people's stigmas for certain things highlights, oh, and then the judgment that comes from that, as compared to that's actually a good thing that you're at least preventing, or like at least thinking about
Hmm.
your health, thinking about certain consequences, and you're trying to prevent those early. Because I know even PrEP, like I know that there's some people who take it not as a, oh, I have it, but as a preventative measure,
Yeah, right.
right?
That's what it's
To say
for.
I'm just, yeah, that's what it's for, right? So it's like, but then someone could see that and be like, oh, do you have this thing? And it's already like a whole, misconception
Right.
about someone that's just like, hey, I just want to stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love surveys and all these things where you're trying to figure out what's happening or trying to get people certain help and things like that. I think that's always pretty cool. But if we're to just, move to your work right now, as in what you're doing,
Hmm.
because I know you said you have your own effort to like support the federal workforce, federal contracting workforce through like, community building conversations. Can we talk more about that? Like what inspired you to want to start doing these like efforts, and like what was the goal of that? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about like the work with HIV prevention and treatment that we were doing, when you're doing work like that and it's impactful and you can see a direct result, it's mission-driven work that people can be very passionate about and very attached to and that kind of thing. And the work that I was kind of primarily working on after that was evaluating communication materials, primarily on
Mm.
behalf of the Food and Drug Administration. So working with their communications division, for example, looking at communication around medical device recalls. How do they communicate effectively with the public about medical device recalls? And that was a multi-year project with many people involved in many phases that was nearing completion, right? And then you had the change of administration and all these people who were mission driven, tens of thousands of people were suddenly let go. And when people are let go, so it was the government employees that were let go and then the government contractors. So I was working as a government contractor. There was one week when there were 20 something thousand layoffs in HHS, and I saw all my past clients and my current clients being laid off. And a week
Wow.
later, there's no work. There's no work left for me to do, so I'm laid off as well. And I mean, it's very talented people who really believed in the work that they were doing. And then you
Yeah.
have this area where you have tens of thousands of people who are suddenly unemployed. Some people who had been doing their work for 20, 30 years, who didn't know anything but that. That had been their whole career. And suddenly you had so much of the contracts themselves were canceled, people were let go. There was no place to go. The work that we were doing that we believed in so much suddenly didn't exist. And then you look at the experience of a layoff. the experience of a layoff is situated very much in your job situation. So I was telling
Yeah.
my daughter recently, there comes a point with every job when you are embarrassed to return and show your face. You know, with every
Mm.
job, there are the things that are going fantastically and things that aren't going so well. And a layoff is situated in that even when you're told this has nothing to do with you, even if you're one of 10,000 people who are let go in this, even when you know it's because the work wasn't there, it can feel very personal. And you have all these people who are going through what's like a common event that we're all kind of going through and managing, but on their own. And then you have these fields of study and like knowledge and experience that we believed in that are suddenly, we're told, well, like, go find a job in market research or find, and there are some jobs out there that you can do. But going to workshops where people are trying to repackage themselves, it was like the words don't resonate. Like somebody who's been doing like really mission driven work, it's hard to make that transition into product testing and talking about like some of the marketing keywords that they've never spoken in before. How do I speak this
Yeah.
language that feels inauthentic to me? These are words that are for some of the same work that I've been doing. I have the experience for it, but how do I package myself up for that? And how do I compete with 1,000 other people who are looking at the same job who might speak a little bit more naturally within this place. So you have all these people who are going through very common things. We had a bunch of people who are trying to teach themselves programming languages, but on their own in isolation. And what I really wanted to do was to take all these people who were kind of on their own, struggling, and even the people who had kept their jobs were dealing with the uncertainty of not knowing if they were still going to have the job at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and the end of the month. And some of them are still in that and dealing with just like a lot of other just kind of uncertainty about their budgets for the projects and the work that they do and that kind of thing. So the area was so shaken up. And what I wanted to do was kind of create a way for people to come together and talk about those experiences that they're having in a common way, to teach people like some ways of managing all like the feelings and the schmuck that comes up with it.
Yeah.
And I'd had a lot of those experiences with somebody that I was working as a caretaker for, where we were like working on grounding and anxiety management exercises and things like that. So I wanted to like share some of those skills, but I also wanted to give people a chance to like build something together, to
Mm.
work in community. Like if you're teaching yourself this language and other people are also teaching themselves this language, how do we connect you in a way, if you need help, looking at a resume and there's somebody who's got that ability who's just kind of sitting idle and, give them something to do, like that kind of like lateral career support, all of these sorts of things. Like, how do we come together as a community? So so I kind of came up with this idea of having these kind of community conversations that just bring people together. And the idea was if you could scale it, where you have different communities that are kind of coming together, practicing these kind of anxiety management skills, kind of keeping up with each other. What's going on with you now? How is your job search going? Where is your head during all of this? But
Mm.
also, what can we do to continue to support each other to scale? Then there's community building and community empowerment going on, and we're able to like build and hold something.
I love that so much. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for starting that because as you're describing like kind of what happened as you're describing, right? This and what you're saying is one of the major reasons why I even wanted to start this platform, this podcast, so that this is a space where because I can't imagine the pain, right? Of as you were saying, you were doing this thing or in this field 20, 30, 15 years. This is your life. This is what like you've gone to school for this. You've done 2 degrees for this. This is what this is your whole world essentially. And the plan is to keep going, right? Like you've been doing this work consistently for a long time and there's an end goal that you want to accomplish.
Mhm.
And now you can't even get there. It's now thrown out the window,
Mhm.
right? So there's the pain of that, knowing that there's the lack of closure that okay, you didn't get to finish everything you've been doing, and now it's not like just you can just switch. It's not like your company just shut down. It's like the whole industry shut down essentially. So it's not even like you can take that work and transplant it somewhere else and kind of still get your goal. It's like no, it's basically over.
Mhm.
Like so the pain of that, I can't even understand how much it is because I mean I wasn't in the industry as long as others, so I know for sure, like if I felt impacted in some way, I can't imagine how those people felt, right? Like
Mhm.
to have that and to sit with it. And also, cost of living is at an all-time high. We're in a recession, essentially. Things are changing up every day. Things are more expensive. So on top of that as well, where
Mhm.
it's like, okay, now you need to kind of grieve the loss of this ending, but at the same time, you need to look forward and keep yourself afloat. Like, you have to pay bills. Your children still need to go to school. Everyone
Mhm.
still needs to eat. You still need to take care of yourself. So when's like the time to even say, man, I'm messed up and I just need a break. You don't even have that as well. So the fact that your community has not been as important as it is now, and so that's why I really appreciate what you're doing because, or the effort to do this because I feel like this is the moments we need each other the most. To
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm struggling, you're struggling. Okay, let's kind of figure out how we can help each other here. I haven't touched my resume in 10 years. I don't know what the job market looks like anymore.
Yeah.
Let's if I feel like things are easier to go through when you're moving with a group of other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, that sounds like a goal that you're trying to achieve here. That let's instead of just being at home wallowing and trying to figure all this out by yourself, go out there and like even for your mental health, it's even better, right?
Yeah.
To at least suffer with a group or figure life out with a group of people who are going through the exact same thing as you are.
Right. Yeah, so it's this whole thing of like, can we set up groups that are supporting each other, that are building different structures that are supportive for each other in some kind of way that, like what is the
Yeah,
the potential there? There, I mean, there are a whole bunch of people who are going into independent consulting. How can we support each other in that transition to independent consulting? One of the things
yeah,
that's coming out of one of the groups that we did was this event that's kind of, it's not official yet, but it's this Career Change-a-Palooza event, which is like a lateral
mm,
career support event where people who are trying to kind of reinvent themselves and people who are in that kind of unsure environment can all, and like people, I mean, you have people in the past, you had like the mentors and the mentees. You had the kind of professional helpers and the people who needed help. But now you have people who've been reviewing resumes for 10 to 15 years who are trying to reinvent themselves. So the traditional paradigms are all kind of flopped on their head.
mm-hmm,
And really, like, the best thing we can do is like stay with each other. This is what I'm learning through my job search process. This is what's working for me. This is what's not. I'm trying to start my own thing. I've learned that this kind of status is better than this kind of status, or I should include this in my business plan, or not this in my business plan, or AI can do this, or AI cannot do this. There's so many different things there that hopefully, we bring together people who are kind of all going through these transitions together. We can get a number of kind of different groups that are going.
yeah. This makes me think of one of my former colleagues. We're just having a phone call, like I think about a week ago, and he was telling me that ever since things stopped, like I think he was laid off maybe around March, right? From then until now, he's done like 200 plus applications and nothing has worked out,
Yeah.
right? And he was like further along in his career, like he's been doing this for a long, long time. And then, it's just like, and then the junior people behind him have somehow been getting jobs,
Hmm.
right? And it's now like I think at somebody just started questioning himself, like, is it me? Is it am I too old to be hired anymore? Am I and all these questions that start happening and sometimes and what he told me was like he actually meets with other former colleagues to just kind of like talk
Yeah.
about what's happening because, you know, when you're by yourself and you're hearing like, oh, certain people are getting hired over you, you really do start to question yourself, like,
Yeah.
what am I doing wrong? Or am I unemployable now? And that can really affect you if you're not interacting with other people who might be,
Yeah. I mean, that's such a part of it. And
yeah.
even just like in some of the groups, you hear people talking about how like they don't know quite what to do with their time, like even self-care things. Am I wasting my
Mm,
time that I should be spending getting a job if I'm out here doing this thing or that thing? And like, what if we turn it on our head as mission-driven people who care about the work that we're doing and say that you are part of this field and this really important part of knowledge, and preserving yourself also preserves that.
mm. Yeah, no, true. Because again, there's also I don't know if people have been talking too much about it, but there's also the guilt, right?
Yeah.
The guilt that you feel when you wake up in the morning and you don't really know where to start or where to go from. And then, you know, you want to do something else, like, okay, just want to take a walk in the park. And then there's the guilt of, man, I could be sitting at my laptop right now applying for a job,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm out here taking a walk, and it's like the guilt of like you can't even enjoy the things that you might have enjoyed. Or like I've felt that as well myself, where like certain things that I enjoyed before, now I can't actually like actually stay away from them because I'm like, okay, if I start doing this, I'm gonna feel guilty that I could be using this time to be more productive,
Right. I heard from
as you know,
so
as they
many
would
people who
say.
were saying that they were really struggling with that kind of thing. And it's also just like the structure. After having
Yeah.
been, working in my field for almost 30 years, and the longest break I took was like 3 weeks of maternity leave because I couldn't really afford to take a proper maternity leave, Is like that structured my life for so long. Like my work really
Yeah.
structured my life. But now it's like I choose what time I wake up in the morning and I choose when I go to sleep, and that's a whole lot of responsibility. And in some ways is great because there's some freedom attached to it, but there's also that just
Hmm.
like fear, that like sense of being unbounded when you're used to
Yeah.
being so regulated and so determined in some kind of way.
How have you dealt with that? If you've had those like when that's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the guilt that just kind of keeps me working all the time on the things that I'm doing.
Mm.
But it's also, it's weird because I'm not like the efforts are having some success and they're catching on in some kinds of ways. Like I could be doing groups pretty much every day of the week with different organizations that I've been in touch with, which is pretty exciting and pretty cool. But I'm still not making
Yeah.
any money, and that's a terrifying place to be. So,
No. Yeah. I get that. I think a lot of us are actually in that place where like you're now focusing on something they've always wanted to do or trying to pivot,
mhm.
but it's really not bringing any monetary.
I wanted
You know,
to,
it's not.
yeah. I
Yeah,
wanted to
it's
take
not
the
bringing
time.
anything.
Like I wanted to, like I do have like a little bit of a cushion, and so I wanted to take that time to like, can I create my own thing? What would it mean to create my
Yeah.
own thing? What was that? What would it even look like? And then what a pleasure, what a gift to create something for yourself and then work for it instead of having your work kind of handed down to you like I've had over the
Yeah.
past 30 years. And I've loved my work so much, but the idea of determining what I do and how I do it and what kind of terms and what I stand for. I mean, I think that that's a lot of like the work that I do is like kind of iteratively going back and saying, what do I stand for? What matters? Especially
Mm.
with these groups because you have different organizations are interested in different kinds of things. So if somebody wants me to come in and do meditation and breath work, is that the same thing or is it not the same thing? You know?
That is true.
There are
Yeah.
a lot of just kind of questions about like what is it that's important about this work and what do I stand for? What do I need to double down on?
Mm. Yeah. And you know what? Like, I think a lot of us are also at that crossroads, right? Where you going forward, like, pushing with that passion, that you have
Hmm.
versus making money.
Hmm.
Because there's a long-term vision and there's the short-term needs. Short-term, rent needs to be paid, food needs to be bought. Long-term,
Hmm.
this passion you have could actually lead to something great.
Right.
The only unfortunate thing about the long term is you don't know how long it's going to be,
Exactly.
and you don't know when it's going to be successful, and you don't know when, you just, it's very uncertain,
Hmm.
but your immediate needs are very, very present. Like, you know exactly what you need and when. So it's like that crossroads of like, okay, how do you balance this? How do you, for some it's different for everybody, of course, like different, for some people they have a spouse that can kind of like alleviate some of those short-term needs.
Yeah.
Some people don't.
Hmm.
Some have kids that they need to take care of. Some people don't. Some people have kids that are much older. Some people have kids that are younger. Some people, both of y'all lost your jobs
Yeah,
and you have to figure it out. So it's like
definitely.
all these different nuances for different people, and like, okay, like it's how do you move forward in a way that you're staying true to yourself, but you're also able to take care of yourself, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah, right. And that's something a lot of people are dealing with right now. So,
Yeah. So how many of these community like events have you actually had so far?
um, so I have like a couple of different groups that I've had series with. It's kind of like I guess it depends on what you qualify as a group or what you don't qualify as a group. Some things
Yeah.
that I'm doing like leading meditation and discussion series at a senior center and things like that. It's kind of tangentially related. And it allows me to
Hmm.
practice some skills like leading meditations and things like that that I wouldn't have otherwise done. And like really allows me to talk to people about transition and what is transition and, like finding your identity in times of transition. And actually, like it's interesting because it just like brings up so many different parts that like I did doula training like some 20 something years
Ah.
back. And I was, leading weekly sessions with people at a senior center who were dealing with chronic pain, and I looked for like different kinds of exercises and practices and things like that that I could teach them as part of our weekly session for managing pain. And I realized that there really wasn't anything good out there beyond like doing a body
Hmm.
scan meditation or like certain kind of breath work or anything like that. So I went back. I have my doula training books out all over again, and I'm kind of writing out curriculum and like pain management and things like that. So it's like, do I include those things? Do I not include those things? But I think that I have a lot more that's in the hop, like in the works than I do, like that
Hmm.
I've been able to do so far.
Hmm.
So.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, and just having it tie back to things that you've done before is not always like such a great feeling. Like, man, this is something that you had back in the day, and then now it's like
Mhm.
irrelevant again. Isn't
Yeah.
that callback is always so nice when it's like, man, that skill that I learned back then, I can actually put it to use now.
Right. And it's just the most random like set of skills and things that are coming together. And I mentioned like the Oliver Sacks book, for example. Like seeing the Oliver,
Yeah.
it's like so many different like little corners of my life coming together for this that I never would have expected coming together. And that's cool. It's really cool to see. Because that was part of
Yeah,
what I
it's
thought. It's
yeah.
like, oh, well, I've got the doula training. Maybe I can do doula training as well as this stuff. Then it's like, look, it's already part of it, even if I'm not assisting births. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's beautiful, isn't it?
yeah.
I love that. Yeah. So overall though, like I know what would be like the ideal place that this leads to for you?
I think so. With any kind of community-based participatory research project, which is kind of like that's kind of the approach that I really want for these community conversations, is where they're like there are people who are part of the communities that are involved in the planning and the recruitment and like getting the group started, and then like keeping the group alive. So ideally, like each group is kind of self-sustaining, and I don't really need to be involved
Hmm.
with anything other than like setting it up in the first few sessions and developing that kind of like practice for each group and helping to find direction. Ideally, I would have some like organizational support so that when people say, I want to build this thing and this thing, I can say, okay, well, this person is going to help you through this and this and this that you want to be able to do and help kind of guide them through in the resources to be able to say, here's the money that you need in order to start the thing that you need to start or to continue the thing that you start. And then, I also want to be free to do some of my own research at the same time, which I think I can kind of like roll in with really looking at that like community-based participatory approach and looking at that community building approach of like looking at the people who are the most disengaged or have the least voice and helping people to establish communities that have like a continuous source of voice for the community and insight for people who need insight into the community and that kind of like where the community is benefiting from it, but setting up those different kind of community efforts, um,
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. And then also there was something that I've always wanted to do, which is kind of a bit of just like community documentation, like interviewing
Hmm.
various people as part of different communities and like kind of doing photo documentation and then helping people to tell their stories and their community stories and things that happen in different places and things like that. So my goal is to roll all of these things in together into one into one company and then get that started and have it be as self-sustainable as possible.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I have to say you are doing a fantastic job so far. I think you're on the right path. It sounds like it's building and it's going. So I'm excited to see where it goes because this sounds like something you're really passionate about, and at the end of the day when you're helping other people, you're never doing it the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's always the right thing. So no, I'm very yeah, I'm happy to hear about what you're doing, and I think it's really great. So
Thank
I just
you.
wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it because there is just a little bit of that feeling of like, what the heck am I doing? Really?
Yeah.
I'm out there in the water unbounded, so I appreciate that.
No, you're doing a great job because I know how hard it is to do anything like this.
Mhm.
So I think you're definitely moving in the right. It's uncharted waters, right?
It is.
So and you're still here. You're
Hmm.
still you're still flapping in that uncharted water. So that means you're going somewhere.
Right.
So yeah, that's the most important thing. So, before we close out here, what would you say to somebody who is hearing about this for the first time
Mhm.
and they've been looking for something like this and they didn't know where to look and they didn't know like, okay, this is something that could actually be helpful because sometimes people don't know how to ask for help or don't know who to reach out to if they need just community,
Yeah.
right? It can be hard to also know where to start. So to those people, in general, like do you have any words that you could say or like what they should do or like any tips or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I have like kind of individual kind of one-off groups and things that are open to the public, as well as I'm working with different organizations and to develop events that are sometimes private and sometimes public. Of the things are listed, some things aren't listed yet. I have a free range research blog,
Hmm.
so www.freerangeresearch.com. And on it, there's a community healing conversations page that has a link to the events that are listed. Anybody is welcome to join the events at any time. If you just want to kind of like come and see what it's about and that kind of thing. I think if you're nervous about talking, participating, or anything like that, I would just urge people to focus on like people come as they are in whatever shape
Hmm.
they're in, and they leave feeling a little bit better and a little bit more connected and a little bit better resourced and that kind of thing. So it's always worthwhile to participate in something like that. There's also like events like the book clubs. We have this No Wrong book club that we started for people who are going through career transitions. We called it No Wrong Book because some of the people came to the first session and said, I'm going through a career transition. That's the majority of my life, so everything I'm reading is fluff. And it's like,
Mm.
that's awesome because we need that too. And all of that is welcome. So, we talk about the fluff books as well as like other types of books. But there are the events that are there. There are more events to come. People are totally welcome to join. If there are organizations or groups or people who are interested in establishing something like that, just reach out to me directly through the blog, and I'm happy to work with you to establish something. So, and if anybody has
Yeah.
anything to
Well, so where
offer,
can people contact you?
um,
Yeah, where can people contact you or like where can they find that information? To like, hey, I want to get involved. Like where can they get
yeah,
that?
I think through the blog or through
The
like
blog?
LinkedIn
Okay.
or something like that is probably the best way right now.
Okay. So okay, no, so that's awesome. So when I release this episode, I will have the link to your blog
Beautiful.
attached
Thank
to
you.
where I post so that people have access to this. Like if you're listening to this, you'll find it in the description. When I post it on LinkedIn, you'll find it on LinkedIn. Um, I don't know if you have, is there like an Instagram page for this or no?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Okay. So yeah, whenever that comes about,
Mhm.
I'll also, if I see it, I can also just link that. But for now, I'll just whatever the blog, because I was reading it before this, like just things that we talked about. And what I really liked is one of the things you said, as you said right now, you don't have to come and feel like you need to participate. It's also okay to just come and just sit and listen. Like that's
Yeah,
also okay. And that's because I know people can sometimes feel pressure, with these things to like, oh, they have to participate and talk, and it's also okay to just pull up, pull a chair and just sit and just listen and go home. That's also
exactly.
okay,
That's so
right?
important. And really gets like the come as you are thing that some people will come with strong emotions. Some people won't, and you never know with a group what you're going to walk into, but people always left smiling and laughing.
Which is what we need more than
Exactly.
ever, right?
Exactly. I
Smiling
mean,
and
that's
laughing.
why it's a
Yeah.
healing conversation, right? We go through these things kind of iteratively. We're talking about different things, but we're giving you a chance to like build. Ideally, we can be creative together, right? If you can dream it, you can build it. These things that we're
Mm.
talking about didn't exist 6 months ago, you know? But you
Yeah.
invent them and you can put them into being if you can think about them. So, I mean, if we
Mm.
can get people to the point where they are kind of past that anxiety and those strong emotions that can really like rule people's thinking to a space where they're able to like think and dream and create and support each other and feel a little bit less of the load, you know? You're empowering people, you're connecting people, and giving people a
Yeah.
chance to create and build stuff together. I mean, there's nothing better.
That's awesome.
So,
Yeah. Do you have any virtual events like where like
Yeah.
some people I know they're all over the world, all over the US because I think the physical ones are in the DMV, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
But do you also have
I
virtual?
do. Yeah. So there's the virtual
Okay.
book club, and then there's also like the virtual community conversations, and people are welcome to join either, both.
Okay. Awesome. And they can find that information on the blog,
Yeah, there's a
that
link to the
link.
Eventbrite page
Okay.
on the Community Healing Conversations page on the blog. So
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, so sounds like the blog is the one-stop shop. So
it
yeah,
is.
I'll definitely have that link there and people can just find whatever they need to
And
find.
everything is free. There might be like an optional donation on some of the events, but I think for the most part, that also means free. Everything is free.
Hmm.
So
That's awesome. Cool. Thanks, Casey, for coming on here and bringing all this to light. I definitely always want to highlight people that are doing their best to serve others. So I'm super happy that you came here and you got to put this out there and whoever listens to this, because that's also my target audience, like just people just like going through the same things.
yeah,
I've also tried to help them, so I'm always trying to like plug different resources for different things so that people can feel like, okay, there are outlets out there
yeah.
that and people are doing different things together. So yeah, I'm happy that this is out there, or this will be out there, and people can find, relate to what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about all of this. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure
Yeah,
talking
no,
with you.
yeah, it's been a pleasure talking with you as well. I'm honored for sure, and I'm definitely gonna be pushing what you're doing. And yeah, so I'm excited. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much, listener, for hanging out with us. Please do comment and share, like everybody. Just subscribe as well. Let us know what you think about the conversation, and if you really love what Casey has been talking about, definitely reach out. Find the blog, find her on LinkedIn, all these good things, and yeah, I'm sure she'll be much happy to respond and interact with anyone who wants to do that. So, again, thank you, Casey, for being such a gracious guest on the podcast and, taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
Awesome. With that, listener, we'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.